This morning is not Melissa Thomas. It is Gabrielle Steele. Gabrielle is presenting her final speech on level 1 of the Leadership and Development Pathways. It is a 5 to 7 minute researching and presenting speech that includes scientific discoveries, corporate greed, corruption, sleepless nights, near-death experiences, and yes, Nazis. Please help me welcome Gabrielle Steele to present her speech entitled, Finding Dr. Schatz.
Inga Auerbacher was 7 years old when her entire family was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp. 140,000 people went into Camp Terezin, and Inga and her two parents were within the 1% that survived. While in Camp Terezin, Inga contracted tuberculosis, or TB, and in 1945 there was no cure. It was a death sentence. Deadly and rampaging across the world, TB was called the White Plague. And little Inga Auerbacher, who had survived 3 years in a Nazi concentration camp, was facing her second death sentence and found herself once again confined in a sanatorium for the next 2 years. A few years before all this happened, Albert Schatz had joined the Army Medical Corps, and he saw firsthand the devastating impact of tuberculosis. He watched strong, fit soldiers brought down, coughing up blood, wasting away before his eyes, and dying from tuberculosis. When he got out, he applied for a graduate position at Rutgers University studying antibiotics under Dr. Waxman. As a condition of his employment there, he insisted that Waxman let him study tuberculosis. And he insisted that Waxman let him study the dangerous human virulent strain. Tuberculosis is caused by bacterium. Mycobacterium tuberculosis is what it's called. And so in theory, it was curable by antibiotics. And in the 1930s and 40s, it was the age of antibiotics discovery. So the race was on for a cure for little Inga Auerbacher and the millions of people like her. The World Health Organization estimates that 1/4 of the world's population has tuberculosis in their body. That's 1 in 4 people in this room. I have it. It's 1.8 billion people globally with it. Even by today's standards, it is deadly. It is the #1 infectious killer worldwide. It killed 1.5 million people last year. That's the population of Philadelphia. In North Carolina alone, there are 700 new cases documented annually of tuberculosis. In 1945, they were desperate for a cure. And Albert Schatz was desperately researching it at Rutgers University in the basement, where Dr. Waxman had moved him. Because Waxman didn't believe that the research path that Albert Schatz was on would be fruitful. Albert Schatz, however, was singularly motivated to find a cure for tuberculosis. He slept on a bench in his laboratory. He had security guards come by in the middle of the night and wake him up so he could check on his experiments and add solution. Waxman never once visited Dr. Schatz. In 1942, Albert Schatz discovered the cure for tuberculosis, streptomycin. And the public cry for streptomycin was deafening. Waxman and Schatz gave up all rights to streptomycin. They took $1 in payment so that Rutgers University could license it across multiple pharmaceutical companies. They could produce it in mass quantities and get it to the people who needed it. About this time, Inga Auerbacher was languishing in a sanatorium. Not unlike the Nazi concentration camp she had just escaped, one day a patient would be in their bed, and the next day they would not, and you would never see them again. Little Inga Auerbacher was on death's door when she was among some of the first people to receive streptomycin, and she made a full and complete recovery. Things didn't go quite so well for Albert Schatz. Waxman launched a full-scale campaign against Albert Schatz. He had a secret agreement under the table to receive royalties for streptomycin. He took full credit for the creation of streptomycin and eventually forced Albert Schatz out altogether. To even find work, Albert Schatz had to go to South America to further his career. In 1952, Dr. Waxman got the Nobel Prize for the discovery of streptomycin. It wasn't until many years later, after a long, lengthy court battle, that Albert Schatz received the credit he was due. He received credit as co-discoverer, and he received the Rutgers Medal. Inga Auerbacher was in her 70s when I got to meet her. A breathlessness about her marked the long-term impact that tuberculosis had had on her lungs. A chemist herself, she heard the story of Dr. Schatz, and she tracked him down. She met him, embraced the man who had saved her life, befriended him. She wrote a book about him, she made a documentary about him, and she toured the world telling the story of the man who saved her life. When I'm weighed down by the evil that I see in the world, I think about my time with Inga Auerbacher. I think about her out there righting those wrongs. And I especially think about Albert Schatz, sleeping on a bench in the basement of Rutgers University, saving millions of people's lives and taking $1 in return. I'm inspired by him, I'm buoyed by him, and I'm inspired to try and find something that I can do in the world to make it just a little bit better place as well. Thank you.